Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about Brexit and the latest implications for HR. We'll do some introductions for you. So it's myself, Sue Watson. I'm the HR Operations Manager at HR Solutions, and Victoria will be our main presenter today. Victoria is our HR Knowledge Manager. We're supported by a team who's in the background, helping to field any questions you might have. And this is the agenda that we're going to cover today. So the current situation, as hot as we can make it. I understand there's some changes even today. And then the employment legislation that's affected by it, processing data, managing EU national employees, recruiting from outside the UK, and then a little look at what next. We do encourage you to ask questions. We have got a lot of people on the webinar today, so we've had to mute you all, but we still want to hear your questions. And the way you do this is if you go to your chat panel, you should have a question panel section of it, and you can just type in your question and send it through to us, and then we will monitor them as you go through, and then we'll collate them and ask them at the end. We're also going to make this session as interactive as we would normally at our physical events. So we're going to run a series of polls throughout the session. And when there is going to be a poll, it will appear on your screen like this. Please note, if you want to participate, you need to make sure your screen is not in full screen mode, just to make sure that you can actually tick the boxes. So I'm now going to hand over to Victoria, who will take you through the agenda for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. We'll just change screens. Thank you. And you should be able to see the title page. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sue, and a very good warm welcome to you all today. So we have all known that this topic would be coming up, and unfortunately, not only are we going to have to start talking and thinking about planning for Brexit, but we've got to be doing this during a pandemic. So in terms of today's webinar, hopefully by taking you through the information today, it'll help you in moving forward with your Brexit planning. So today is really all about bringing you all up to speed on the latest information surrounding Brexit and of course the latest implications for HR. So I will begin by summarising the current situation before then covering off key areas that we will need careful thought about over the coming weeks, including understanding what is happening to our employment legislation, how will Brexit impact on how we process people data, what is the situation for businesses which currently employ EU nationals, what happens to the recruitment of EU nationals after the 1st of January, before we then close thinking about some useful actions that we should be taking away in helping us to prepare. So before we get stuck in, we thought it would be a good idea to start off with a couple of polls. So I'm going to hand over to Sue to launch the polls, and we'll see where we are with our thoughts on Brexit at the moment. So over to you, Sue.
Okay. Okay, sorry, thank you. I'm just going to launch the poll for you. So we're asking, of the topics on the agenda that Victoria's just gone through, which one do you think is most going to be a challenge for you? So we appreciate that all of them might be a challenge, but which one do you think will be the most challenging aspect? Just leaving it running to collect a few more responses. There's a lot of people voting at the same time at the moment. Okay, I think most people have voted now, so I'll just close that poll and then share the results with you. So there we go.
Okay.
So 37% think recruiting from outside the UK is going to be a biggest challenge, closely followed by the legislation and then managing EU nationals.
Okay.
So it looks
And
like a lot of people have got data in their data sorted.
which is good. And we'll spend some time actually understanding more about the employment legislation. So hopefully that may alleviate some worries for everybody. And certainly the biggie is the actual recruiting from outside the UK once we're out of this transition period. So that's interesting. Thank you very much, Sue.
Okay, I'll just hide that and hand it back to you. Okay. I think actually we're going to run another poll, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the second poll is, do you feel, I'm just going to share that with you, do you feel a no-deal Brexit would have a significant impact on your business? Okay, I think most people have voted, just the last few now. I'll close that poll and I'll share the results with you.
Okay.
So yeah.
And that's probably you know, what we're expecting, I guess, to see, isn't it? After, you know, from what we hear in the news and everything about how they talk about the deal or whether we don't get a deal. So okay, so that's interesting. So we will touch on this in the coming slides actually. So thank you for that, Sue.
Okay, hand
So
it back to you.
brilliant, thank you. So let's get started then. So before we go into the other areas, we just wanted to give you an update on the current situation. So we are out of the EU, and as everybody will know, we left back in January now. It seems such a long time ago, back on the 31st. And although perhaps we are not noticing at the moment any differences, it's because the UK and EU are yet to agree that trade agreement. And so really it's, I guess things are ticking along at the moment until we leave this transition period. So they're obviously currently trying to get that trade agreement, and it's the trade agreement which will set out the new relationship moving forward from the 1st of January next year. So they are doing this in a transition period, so that's running through to the end of this year, the 31st of December. However, both parties have given until October to get a deal negotiated, and that's really because the UK government have to allow it sufficient time to get it ratified in Parliament. Although what we understand is that the UK government have set a date of, albeit last week, the 15th of October, the EU have given the UK government to the end of the month really to get that deal agreed. And the latest position, I'm sure everybody will be aware, is that these negotiations are still ongoing. There was a period last week where they came to a halt, but from today they've kick-started the negotiations again back in London. And what I heard, I guess, on the news earlier at lunchtime is that they probably expect these to be carrying on through to probably Sunday. So at this moment, it's in the sort of, I guess, the key area of that negotiation phase. I suspect we may get a development come the start of next week. So if a deal cannot be reached, then it will mean that the UK will leave the EU with a no-deal Brexit come 1st of January. So the agreement is actually fundamental and perhaps more important than actually what the withdrawal agreement was. And the withdrawal agreement was the agreement that allowed us to exit in the first place. Because really it's a trade deal that will determine how Brexit impacts, you know, on the UK economy. And so from a HR perspective, how any no deal may affect the economy is ultimately going to impact on UK employment levels. So we know that if a deal cannot be negotiated, then the UK defaults to the World Trade Organization, the rules set out by that organization, and consequently it would mean that we would see tariffs and border checks being applied to UK goods, which will be, I suspect, a very serious concern for businesses, and which could therefore see an increase in unemployment levels. because we have already seen businesses, large organisations announce a move away from operating within the UK simply because of the operating costs. And so depending on the outcome of the negotiations, we do risk more employers taking that same approach if as a result of Brexit it becomes more costly to operate. And of course, the added complexity at this point in time is that the UK, well, everybody, worldwide is in the middle of a pandemic. And the latest position that we know in terms of COVID-19 and Brexit is that there are no plans to extend this transition period past 31st December. There was cut off, I think, back in the summer that the government could have requested an extension, but that never happened. So we are still working towards that 31st December for the end of the transition period. So there is still a lot of uncertainty at this stage. However, there are some things that we do know. So at first, we're going to look at employment law and the impact for us from January next year. So a significant amount of existing UK employment legislation has its basis in EU legislation. Some of our laws derive from the EU, such as your equal pay, parental leave rights, and some anti-discrimination laws, for example, your religion and sexual orientation discrimination, because those discrimination laws came about after the UK had joined the EU back in 1973. So what this means is that until the 31st of December, whilst we're in this transition period, the current EU employment law will continue to provide UK employees with guaranteed employment rights, because ultimately UK domestic law must not fall below those EU standards, and we're in this transition period. But from the 1st of January 2021, then employment rights that are currently guaranteed by EU law will no longer be guaranteed. So it will be for the UK to either amend or remove any of the existing employment rights moving forward. And time will tell as to whether the government will do that. But essentially, part of the whole argument for Brexit was, about having our independence and being able to set our own laws. So although the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act of 2020 no longer contains a provision that the UK will retain these rights, because I think early days there were proposals that they would, the UK government have committed to actually voluntarily ensuring that they do. So, as I say, time will tell in terms of what happens from the UK government moving forward next year in terms of legislation. And then in terms of creating the new legislation, the UK will not be able to translate any new EU legislation into UK domestic law. As I say, the UK will be setting its own legislation, and we don't expect too much changing early next year, especially given we have COVID to deal with. But as I say, we will eventually start seeing the government to make revisions to existing laws. We also need to consider that any case rulings that arise from the European Court of Justice, also known as the ECJ, they'll no longer have that binding effect on UK law from next year. And so if I give you an example, so earlier this year there was a case at the ECJ where the court gave a ruling as to who counted as a worker under EU legislation. And it was a case about a UK claimant working for Yodel who argued that they'd been incorrectly classified as self-employed. Now the ECJ, in this case involving a UK-based employee, actually ruled in their favour, meaning that this ruling, even though it was listened to and explored in a European court, it meant that it became binding on us for the UK. So that's what we've had to deal with up to now. And then moving forward, what essentially we'll be doing is that we won't be required to pick up any new laws that come out from the European Court of Justice. Also within our employment tribunal system, claimants can have rulings refer to the ECJ, because essentially the ECJ interpret whether the relevant EU directive has been implemented. So from the 1st of January, the UK employment tribunals will not be able to refer any matter to the ECJ for its interpretation on that. We have European Works Councils. So currently in employment law, I don't know how familiar people are with this, but an employee can ask their employer who has offices across the EU to set up a Works Council, an EWC. An EWC is effectively a forum in which you can provide information and consult with your employees on issues that affect employees in 2 or more EEA countries. So of course with Brexit, what we do know now is that after that transition period, so come 1st of January, employees will no longer be able to ask their employee to set up these EWCs. However, an employer will be able to still accept a request if it's received right up until the last minute of 31st of December, but any requests that come in after, there's no legal right to ask. Having said that, the government are encouraging businesses to still continue to allow UK workers to be represented on EWCs. So I guess it's really important to consider whether your business wants to do this, perhaps consider the benefits of the forum in terms of the positive impact they can have on employee morale, engagement, and how effective it is as a communication tool and consultation tool for you. And then in regards to employment law, I wanted to flag employee insolvency, and obviously we're in a very difficult, challenging situation for business worldwide. And I guess if an employee becomes insolvent from the 1st of January onwards, then what happens? Well, the rights of UK and EU employees who work in the UK, they won't change. But it's where you have UK employees working in an EU country for a UK employer, then if there was to be an insolvency situation, then employees may still be protected by the National Guarantee Fund that's established in the relevant EU country that they're working in. So each EU country may have different rights defined. So if you suspect that insolvency is a real threat, then, and you do have employees operating out in Europe, then seek that legal advice just to understand the ramifications of that and what rights may continue. Processing data, so this is all about the GDPR, and as we saw from the poll, this probably is not so much of a concern for all of you, but it's just worthwhile running through and sort of highlighting what the situation is. And at present, despite having left the EU, we are still legally bound by GDPR during this transition period. However, because the GDPR is in a European regulation, it means that it will no longer apply from the 1st of January. However, we do have UK data protection laws, the Act of 2018. So even though the GDPR technically won't be the law that underpins our actions moving forward, we do have a very similar legislation, the Data Protection Act. So in reality, we're not going to see very little change in regards to processing data. The GDPR rules could still apply to you if you operate in Europe or when any organisation in the EU sends you data. And in terms of the exchange of personal data, so that's anything that can identify a person, then the government have indicated that the transfer of data from the UK will not be restricted. Transfer rules will also apply to any data coming from the EU unless something called an adequacy decision is made by the European Commission. So essentially the European Commission has the power to make this adequacy decision, which effectively determines whether the UK, which is obviously out of Europe, still provides an adequate level of data protection. So I think at this stage things are not yet confirmed in regards to this, but we should know more over the couple of weeks, especially as we find out more about whether a trade deal and how we're going to work together moving forward. But we do know that we do have the Data Protection Act, and in fact the UK government are keen to maintain the very high standards we have currently set out in GDPR. So really, I guess the reality of it is there's probably not going to be too much of a change in regards to data protection here. So for many of you, you'll be already employing EU national employees. And what we want to actually do is ask pull up another poll and just to find out of you if you how many of you do employ EU nationals. So Sue, can I ask you to call up the poll for me, please?
Yeah, we can. Just launching that now for you. So, if you employ EU nationals, have you reviewed their employment status and identified any areas of risk to the business? Most people have voted now.
Okay.
Just close that poll. Okay, and I'll share the results with you. So there we go, 63% yes. Still 37% no, so.
Yeah. So that would be one thing that we would recommend. So yes, so 63% of you have started to review the employment status. Okay, so that's really good. So we'll sort of talk about what this means to us all now, and I guess some practical steps. So for EU, EEA, and is there another poll? Sorry, Sue.
No, that's all.
No, that's fine. I thought there was. So for EU, EEA and Swiss nationals and those who are family members of an eligible person of Northern Ireland who currently work for a UK organisation can apply to stay in the UK after Brexit, and it's part of the EU settlement scheme. So provided they have entered the UK by the end of the year, the 31st of December, then they'll be permitted to live and work in the UK after Brexit. And what we do know is that there has been a grace period offered given EU nationals who are currently working for a UK company to allow them to apply up until 30th of June next year. So there's a little bit of leniency there. So for those employees who have indefinite leave to enter or remain, they can continue to live in the UK without applying to the EU settlement scheme. However, if they spend more than 2 years in a row outside of the UK, then they lose their settled status. But they can avoid that through applying for the EU settlement scheme. And if that is granted, then what it means to them is that they can spend up to 5 years basically in a row outside of the UK without losing their settled status. We also have employees that may have lived in the UK before 1973, so they will have been given indefinite leave to remain, in which case they do not need to apply for that EU settlement status. And what's really important to note is it's your employee's own responsibility to apply to the EU settlement scheme. And as the employer of an EU national, you actually cannot require them to do it. So it is all on your employee to do it. So that's probably going to be a little bit of a tricky bit because actually you've got no control from that perspective. So we'll come on to how we can manage that later on when we look at sort of the next steps. We're going to look at recruiting from outside the UK, which obviously came up highly in our poll earlier, didn't we, at 37%. So we're going to do another poll, and it's understanding whether you anticipate recruiting from outside the UK from January 2021 onwards. So over to you, Sue.
Okay, I've launched the poll.
Okay.
Okay, I think nearly everybody's voted now, so I'll close that poll.
Yeah.
And I will share the results. There you go.
Okay,
so,
brilliant. So
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good to understand, and you know, we've got the which I'm going to come on to talk about, the new points-based scheme. That's going to be very relevant. So the next few weeks and months in preparing for that are going to be crucial. So yeah, thank you for that, Sue.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you. So we're going to look at recruiting from outside the UK, and as everybody will know, a consequence of Brexit is that the free movement of people ends. And so the end date is the end of the transition period, which is the 31st of January. So the government have introduced a new points-based immigration system, which we introduced from the 1st of January next year. And essentially it's about treating EU and non-EU citizens equally in terms of working in the UK. And it applies to those arriving in the UK from the 1st of January 2021. So as an employer, you will be required to apply for a sponsor license to recruit from outside the UK. So I know there's a large proportion of you that are thinking of that. So if you don't already recruit outside of the UK, then that will be your one of your immediate next steps, because you have to become a license holder in order to recruit. The job applicant will be required to score at least 70 points, so we know that much at this point, through a process that effectively awards points for a variety of different characteristics, such as the salary of the job offer that they've been given, the qualifications that they hold, and if the role is considered to be in shortage. There's a lot of information, and these 70 points, a certain amount of points that they'll have will be mandatory. They have to have, and the rest of the points could be made up by trading away. So, but what we do know is they need to have the 70 points in order to be eligible to work. To transition to the new immigration system, then actually employers will be given 6 months grace period to continue to accept passports and national identity cards of EU nationals. It's actually called a transition period, but I'm trying to avoid it because we've got too many transition periods talked about. But essentially, you will still have a number of months up until the 30th of June where you can continue to check the usual identification checks at the moment, so their ID cards, etc. There will be costs involved. There will be a fee to become a sponsor license, and there are also the usual immigration skill charges as well. And from the top of my head, the immigration skill charge is about £1,000, and then you may have to pay another £500 6 months later, etc. So there will be costs. So from a budgeting point of view, if you are anticipating recruiting from outside the UK, and perhaps you haven't done up to now, then there will be a financial implication that goes with it. And actually, I just wanted to let you know as well that next month we will be running a webinar dedicated to this scheme. So we'll go in much more detail about this scheme in next month's webinar. So we are coming to the end of a few of the webinar. We've got to talk about what next, but before we do, we're just going to revisit the very first poll that we opened up with. So and it's just understanding whether now we've gone through understanding the employment legislation, data protection, recruiting and managing, you know, existing EU nationals, whether you feel these still remain a challenge for your business. So Sue, if I can ask you to open up the poll.
Yeah, there you go. I've launched the poll. I can see definitely one area is going to change. Okay, I'll close the poll and share those results with you. So there you go.
So the recruiting from outside is now 54. Was it 37 before, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and the employment law, okay, so that's slightly lower. Of course, data processing, yeah, 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and managing employees, what was that before? 25. So that's come down a little bit. Okay, so really the biggie is recruiting from outside the UK, isn't it, in this new points-based system. So as I say, we are running a webinar next month all on that, the ins and outs and how to manage that process. All I would say, I guess, on that is probably the biggest area to start planning for now, given the what's involved in terms of applying to be a sponsor, etc., and working out what kind of visa types, etc., that we needed. So and also on the managing employees who are EU nationals, then I think what's really important is the understanding your current workforce, trying to identify where there may be risks in terms of if you have to have job attrition, people leaving. So, okay, so I think what we're going to do is conclude by just following up with some next steps and suggestions. Let's move on to the next slide. And I guess, think about what next, given that we are in a pandemic and we've got to deal with two major subjects. So I guess from my point of view, my advice would be to put Brexit at the top of your agenda to ensure that you can be ready and compliant come the 1st of January. Absolutely review your recruitment needs now, sooner rather than later, because essentially there could be a few hurdles in the way in terms of trying to navigate through this new points-based system, although I appreciate there's some leniency in terms of timeframes and deadlines. So review your recruitment needs for next year. Think about whether you're likely to need to recruit from the outside of the UK, and therefore do you need to become a sponsor. My understanding is that to apply to be a sponsor, it's taking around 8 weeks to do so. So, and that's what was currently now, but as we continue with the pandemic and the impact on everybody working and things like that, who knows whether some of those lead times might get impacted on, I don't know. So at the moment, it's taken about 8 weeks to process license applications. Then it's about understanding your current position in terms of who you already employ and who is an EU national. So what roles do they carry out? What would the risks be to the business if they weren't to apply to the scheme? Because remember, it's down on the employee to apply, and as an employer, you can't require an employee to do it. So I would suggest devising a plan in which you can just monitor the situation. So identify who it is in your business, what are the roles that they undertake, try and explore and understand, what their plans are, and just keep a monitoring of it as we move through the coming weeks and months. And you can therefore work out any associated risks. But that, I think, could be a big one, especially if you're an employer that employs a lot of EU nationals. If there's a threat of insolvency, then and you do employ UK nationals in the EU, then it's about seeking that advice early and guidance because of the implications on employment rights for them operating in that EU country. If you do have European Works Councils, then review your existing EWC agreement. As I said earlier, the government are encouraging businesses to continue to allow UK workers to be represented. So consider whether your business wants to do this. Consider the benefits that you gain from it versus, any challenges that you see from operating them, and think about whether you want to voluntarily continue with them moving forward. And then join our next webinar to learn the details about that points-based immigration system. I think given that 54% came up with that's the biggest challenge, I think knowing the details is going to be really important so you can start planning. And for those of you who are members of our knowledge base, then we are in the process of reviewing and updating all of our content, so please do keep a lookout over the next few months for all of our template forms, guides, etc. So over to you, Sue, in terms of whether we've had any questions raised on today's webinar.
We have had a few. If I just take them in order of topic first. So data protection, we've been asked whether that means we need to remove all GDPR references from our contracts of employment. I know we changed our templates, didn't we? Some time ago in anticipation of this.
Yes, so for new employees moving forward, you want to have a contract of employment that references UK legislation. So as I said, we've got the data protection of 2018, so reference UK legislation. the reality, as I said earlier, is in practice we're not going to see much difference. The government do want to maintain those high standards that are linked with GDPR, but I guess theoretically, and when it comes to written legal documentation, we should be referring only to UK legislation.
Yeah, and I think if you do refer to data protection legislation as a generic title, if you want to refer to the Data Protection Act 2018, then just ensure that you insert in any subsequent amendments. Then you've future-proofed it for at least a little while anyway. So that's probably the best way. Okay, there's a few questions now about the points-based system, sponsorship, etc. I don't know how much we can cover on this one, but so just a couple of them, if I can. Do you know whether it applies to subcontractors as well, or is it just employees? Do you happen to know that one, or do we need to go away and research and come back?
So yes, so in terms of if you're recruiting from outside the UK, there'll be various types of visas effectively that they're coming in on. The skilled workers is your main one, isn't it? But people can come in, you know, sports, specialist, highly skilled, you know, like scientists. I can't remember all the category names. There's so many of them. And what the employment contract would be when you offer, because they have to have a job offer, don't they? So I'd probably have to take that away and look into that a little bit more. But there are different types of basically schemes in which there's routes into the UK from next year.
So yeah, and we will explore it, won't we?
Term as well. Yeah, sorry. So you can bring people in short term, not necessarily long term, and that again dictates if it's tier 2 or tier 5, because there's 2 tiers.
There are 2,
yeah.
So we will go into it in a lot more detail, but we will come back to you and respond more fully as soon as we can afterwards. Do you know if somebody refuses to go through the settlement scheme, does that technically mean that they are in the UK legally after June next year? So can they end their employment?
Well, it would be, because you know, employers can be fined, can't they, if they knowingly employ technically illegal workers. But so the employer can't require an employee to apply. It's got to be the employee's choice. But effectively, if they don't, then I would say there's grounds for a SOSR process.
Yeah. So but seek advice, obviously, unless you are familiar with handling that process.
Yeah.
So it does need to be handled carefully and sensitively, because sometimes they have applied, but there's been a delay for whatever reason. We had somebody who had moved house, and they'd started their application with their original address, and they would only send the statement, the certificate, to their original address, and they'd already left it, so they didn't want personal information going to the address they'd left. So it caused several conversations with the Home Office before they finally got it sorted. So, you know, there could be all sorts of reasons why there are delays. So you have to make sure you've understood whether there is a genuine reason for the delay in them providing it before you jump down the dismissal route or terminating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so go careful, but yes, potentially.
Yeah, in theory, you've got mechanism.
Yeah. And do you know, Victoria, if you've already got a sponsor, whether you need to renew it under the new scheme or whether you can continue with the same?
My understanding is it can continue because it's a license, and my understanding is you can continue with it. And then it's, you know, the thing that will change is the job offers. So if you're bringing in multiple people from outside of the UK, then the license, you don't keep getting a new license, that remains the same, but you obviously have to, each case will have their own job offer to be eligible.
And then if you have a EU national who has worked in the UK for over 20 years, do they need right to work paperwork?
So before no, so they would be. It's only where they came before 1973, isn't it? Where they remain in the UK. So they currently work for the employer, and they've got 20 years.
Yeah. If they've worked in the UK for over 20 years, they just need to apply for settled status.
Yeah, they just need to go through that process, and they get either the settled or pre-settled status. That that is whichever the outcome.
Forward, don't they? Yeah. So we, I think that's most of the key ones. There are one or two other questions.
Okay.
Okay, we've got. Do you know anything about internships without having to apply for a visa? So
yes. So under the
the question was, can EU citizens come to the UK from January for 1 to 2 months of internship without having to apply for a visa?
Well, yes. So there's going to be several routes in. One of those would be like graduates, trainees, students, intercompany transfers. So there will be different ways in which you can bring people in, depending on the circumstances. And obviously there has to be a role offer, job offer there. But essentially, yes, there will be very different, several ways for graduates, trainees, students.
Yeah, and we'll cover all of that kind of detail in the next one. There's somebody's asked if it's worth adding to a contract that the employee, if not a UK national, must continue to have a right to work. We do actually build that into our template contracts already, that under a right to work section that you must have the right to work and you must maintain it, or let your employer know if you no longer have the right to work, or if anything changes. So we put that in just in case you know, visas expire and they don't get renewed or whatever. So yeah, it probably would be wise to include something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably, I've picked out as many as I can of those.
Okay.
Some of them are quite detailed in the terms of the points-based system. So we'll reserve that for the next one, and we'll come back to the rest of you as soon as we can.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so I will just switch back and conclude the webinar. Hopefully you can see that now.
Yeah.
So just to let you know that we have got 1 or 2 audits which are free and are available on our website. And there is one on Brexit and there is one on GDPR, as well as a general HR one and a COVID self-assessment. But they are short questions, and you will get a report immediately at the end that you can download. We've moved on to a slightly different system for those of you who have done our audits before, so do try it, and I say you will get an instant report confirming any areas of risk for you. We also wanted to invite you to take a short survey and be part of our research into all the challenges small businesses are facing over the next 12 months. We do this in conjunction with Deloitte, and we will share the results of the survey with you if you participate as well. So just an opportunity to help us inform our advice and support and research that we do over the coming months. We've also got a few new stuff just to let you know. We have a health and safety division now, and we're running some face-to-face training, and there will be some online courses coming up to follow as well, but in those key areas. So if you are interested, do check our website for all the details. We also include specifically some mental health training, which with all the stresses of Brexit and managing the pandemic and everything going on, there is a lot going on in people's lives at the moment, and so any extra support you can provide them could be useful. So just to let you know, we do run training, both generic and customised in-house training, and we do have people who provide employee assistance programs that we work with closely, and we'll give you advice, free advice on what options there are available to you. If you are interested, please let us know. And finally, big issue at the moment is engaging staff, whether they're home working, whether they are going through periods of change, whether you're having to completely change your work processes because of Brexit changes or whatever. It can be really useful to establish how well your employees are engaged and any concerns they might have at this stage. So you get a free trial to actually run a survey as a benchmark. And then you get some recommended actions as a result of the survey and any outcomes from it. And if you implement those actions and you rerun the survey, you can see whether your employee engagement score has improved with the measures you've taken. So it can be a really useful way of understanding whether actually you are hitting the mark with the changes you are making, or whether there are still some concerns that you need to address. As you've probably gathered, it's probably more important than ever to kind of retain those key staff that you really need in this current climate. If you aren't already signed up for our newsletter, then please feel free to go to our website and sign up, and then you will be informed as all these changes come in. We'll keep you updated. We will invite you to webinars and also any HR news that we think might be of interest. Our next couple of webinars, we are looking at our next batch. We'll be adding them shortly. So we've got a health and safety at work statutory compliance one next week from 12 to 1. And then we have a right to work and the new immigration points-based system, where we will cover in a lot of detail some of the stuff we've just alluded to today, and I can see from the questions is a key interest to you. So that one's been held in November, early in November, to give you a bit more time to prepare and to follow up. So do register for those. And as always, if you have any feedback on today's webinar or on any suggested topics for future ones, then please do let us know. We always welcome this. And finally, it remains for me to thank Victoria for taking us through the webinar and fielding the questions, and thanking you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you soon on the next webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.